Welcome again, everyone. My name is Erin Hancock. I work with the WSCF. My pronouns are she or they. I am currently in New York City on occupied Lenape land. And it looks like most of you have already introduced yourselves in the chat box. Thank you. Please feel free to continue doing so if you have not. You can let us know your name, your pronouns, where you're calling from. You can let us know if you're affiliated with a particular school as well, if you're a student, and then also your land acknowledgement. And again, if you're a student, I encourage you to rename yourself with an asterisk at the beginning of your name so that we know to prioritize your questions throughout this conversation. All right, so I would like to next introduce you all to the folks who are going to be facilitating this conversation tonight and leading this conversation. So with us, we have Andrés from SCM Philippines, and Kej is the national spokesperson. And for those of you that might not be familiar with the acronym SCM, it stands for Student Christian Movement. So Student Christian Movement of the Philippines, and he'll be leading our conversation this evening. Kej, do we have others that are here with us?
Yes, I gave them the link. Here's Jonas from SCMP National.
Wonderful.
And I think another one will be joining us.
Okay, great.
From the national office.
Wonderful. Well, feel free to just, as they join us, because you'll know them, feel free to bring them into the conversation. Jonas, it's so good to have you here. Thanks for being with us. And then in addition to our friends from SCM Philippines, we have our co-moderators for the conversation tonight. We have Aurora Celestin, who is an MFA in creative writing student at the New School. And we also have Thomas Hontz, who is an undergraduate at Princeton University studying religion with a minor in German. And they'll be co-moderating. So as you all type your questions into the chat box, they'll be going through and pulling them out to ask. They've also got a few questions of their own. So we're really excited to get this conversation going. Please go ahead and feel free to start typing your own questions into the chat box. If you had a chance to watch the video that Kej prepared for us and you have a few questions of your own, go ahead and drop them in the chat box. We'll also open up the floor for Q&A in a little bit if you want to say your question out loud. But at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Thomas and Aurora.
Thank you, Erin. So as Erin said, Thomas and I prepped a few questions to begin with. One of the first ones we wanted to ask was about how SCM Philippines has been doing in the face of what we all watched in the video in dealing with this kind of junk terror law movement. Has SCM Philippines been targeted for that work and faced not only backlash, but anything, even to a greater extent in targeting your members? So maybe I'll start with Kej, and then I don't know if Jonas would want to jump in.
Sorry, what's the question?
Just if SCM Philippines has been targeted, persecuted for the work you're doing with the junk terror law movement.
Hello, thank you for the question. Many groups here in the Philippines have been targeted because they are being extremely vocal against not only the terror law, but for the wider repression being experienced by the peoples here in the Philippines. And they are being red tagged, meaning that they are tagged as communist or legal fronts of communist insurgents here in the Philippines, similar to what Senator McCarthy from the US did during the 1950s, pushing a Red Scare, not in order to model the struggles of the Filipino people. Like, for example, there was a martial law in the south of the Philippines that started in 2018, and the red tagging was so intense that the military was distributing leaflets that if they say that you are fighting for free education, then you are an armed rebel. That's how convoluted their minds are. And also, red tagging is also dangerous, not only because it models down your advocacy or it links you with armed insurgents, it also, uh, many cases of red tagging have led to worse human rights violations such as arrests, torture, and even killings. Many of those who are killed in by state forces, by military, were red tagged beforehand, and many also experience different kinds of torture in our country. This kind of experience, no, by human rights advocates and other ordinary Filipinos are not isolated during the administration of Rodrigo Duterte. This has been the case even during the US-backed dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos during the 70s and the 80s. And since the political system in the Philippines did not radically change even after the ouster of the then dictator Marcos, the succeeding administrations also practiced these kinds of tactics to scare away the concrete advocacies of the Filipino people. Specifically with under the current administration, the student Christian movement of the Philippines has been ragtagged multiple times, both among local office officials and the national officials. One of the worst red tagging incidents was during last year when the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, which is a government agency tasked to just red tag individuals and organizations, published a wide array of publications on Facebook, red tagging multiple organizations online and linking them with uh, underground movements here in the Philippines. No? So those are baseless accusations. At the same time, trying to model, no, our fight, no? Especially that the current administration is not providing us the medical means. No? And they're taking advantage of the pandemic in order to pursue authoritarian clamping down of civil rights here in the Philippines.
Thank you so much, Kaj. For our second question, I'm talking again, focusing on the SCM Philippines, wondering about the interfaith cooperation. If there is, what kind of interfaith cooperation is there in the junk terror law movement that you've experienced?
Since the country is predominantly Catholic, predominantly Christian, we are more focused with the ecumenical movement to junk terror law and to hold Duterte accountable for his sins against the Filipino people. So here in the Philippines, we are pursuing this ecumenical movement among Catholics, among mainline Protestants, and even people from the evangelicals to be united, no? To be guided by our Christian faith. That in order to exercise it and in order to pursue its liberative aspect, we must have these kinds of unities in order uh, to voice a single voice a unified stance against the terror law and the authoritarian dictatorship of Rodrigo Duterte. Of course, it is it's not easy because not all Christians in our country, actually many Christians here in our country are actually siding with the president because some of them benefit from the anti-people policies, and some of them are also victims of the system that too much individualism, too much the culture of um, self self betterment or lack of collective accountability fuels this kind of disunity in our country. But even but throughout the ecumenical movement, we're trying to educate, no, we're trying to engage the basic masses because they are the ones who are the most vulnerable under the terror law. No? Most killings, most arrests, and most human rights violations happen not among activists who come from the middle class, but from ordinary people who are farmers, who are workers, and who are poor and poor. Additionally, the struggle against the terror law also involves progressive Muslims here in our country because the South Philippines is predominantly Muslim, and they have been victims of also terror tagging. Like it's easy for the government to just tag um, ordinary Muslim individuals as terrorists, as jihadists, and it's easy for them. For example, under the current administration, peasant Muslims have been victims of massacre here in our country. And because of that, Muslims and Christians are trying to work together, no, to educate their fellow Christians and Muslims in order to junk the terror law. Uh, in the legal battle, um, both Muslims and both Christian groups have presented their petitions on the Supreme Court of the Philippines to junk the terror law.
The next question we wanted to ask was about the impact on educational institutions. So how has the anti-terror law affected learning environments, whether that be for students, researchers, educators? How has this law influenced their learning spaces?
The most pressing issue right now is the threat to our academic freedom. Because of martial law under the Marcos dictatorship, there was a strike, there was a commune that was instigated by the students of the University of the Philippines called the Diliman Commune, because they were one with the jeepney drivers against the rising oil prices and the control of the United States in the military of the Philippines. They barricaded their the University of the Philippines 50 years ago. No? So that that action uh, and other succeeding forms of activism from that university brought an agreement between the university and the Department of National Defense in the Philippines that it would be prohibited for state forces to enter the premises of the University of the Philippines. No? However, 50 years after the said event, no, said defense by the students for the university and for the drivers, um, the Department of National Defense under Lorenzana, who is a known puppet of the United States military, suddenly and one-sidedly abrogated the 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 accord, the treaty that prohibits military presence in the University of the Philippines. So why is this very important? Because first, it is a threat to our academic freedom. Second, because of the pandemic, the president, his administration is taking advantage of the pandemic in order for the people to not launch mass protests. However, because the University of the Philippines is an open space and it has very large grounds, progressive groups have been using the University of the Philippines as a freedom space, no, in order to launch protests during the lockdown. Of course, practicing health protocols, no. But because the protests in the University of the Philippines are making news, no, throughout the Philippines and threatening to the lockdown, no, threatening to the attempt to lock down the progressive groups here in the Philippines, they are trying again to infiltrate the University of the Philippines. No? This is not the first time that they are trying to infiltrate our academic institutions. Throughout the pandemic, they are using Zoom classes to red tag progressive groups. No, during 2018 there was another attempt to infiltrate infiltrate schools because the military fetched this idea that there are 18 schools in the Philippines who are trying to brew an a communist insurgency or a communist strike here in the capital. So they called the incident a Red October incident. Then of course it backlashed because there was no proof of such plot. No, then they said it was going to be a White Christmas incident. So they're trying to make very fanciful ideas that students will launch an armed revolution here in Manila. No? Another important thing why this is a threat because universities here in the country are sanctuaries of oppressed people. For example, um, indigenous people who are trying to run away from militarization in the mountains, in the countryside, are trying to seek shelter within universities in order to seek protection and in order to make students know about their struggle. No? So here in the University of the Philippines, there are actually groups of indigenous peoples who are taking refuge, being sheltered by the university. Um, this the police successfully infiltrated a university in the central Philippines in Cebu City, University of San Carlos, where groups of uh, indigenous children are currently taking their classes because they're supposed to be self-sufficient, they building their own schools among their communities in the countryside and among the mountains. But because of militarization, um, they are now forced to hold their indigenous classes in other universities. So what happened was that last February, the police forcibly entered a university in the central Philippines, no, red tagging, using the terror law as an excuse, no, in order to frame the incident that the university is actually kidnapping the indigenous peoples. No, this was refuted by the school, and this was refuted by the religious organization that was running the university. No? And last week we received an this news that um, the sanctuary of the United Church of Christ in the Philippines in Davao, that is sheltering Lumad children or indigenous people's children, their bank accounts are the government is trying to freeze their bank accounts, so in order to cripple their their institution as a sanctuary of indigenous peoples. So another thing is that the terror law is being used against journalists and media practitioners here in our country. A major channel, ABS-CBN, was its operations was stopped last May because of having critical views against the administration. Another online news outlet, Rappler, was also their leaders were also given charges by the government because of libel, no? Interpreting criticism as libel and interpreting criticism as communist propaganda here in the Philippines.
Thank you again, Kej. As we approach probably maybe our most central question, feel free to always put any of your questions in the chat, either direct message us or just send it to everyone. If you'd like to have it remain not anonymous, you can put at the end that you would like to keep it so. But Kej, probably our most important and pressing question is, what do you think the international community can do to assist in the junk terror law movement and to defend the human rights of the people of Philippines against the Duterte regime? More specifically, what can young people in the United States or elsewhere do to be allies in the junk terror law movement?
Since the United States has a sizable population of Filipino diaspora, it would be great, no, if young people in the Philippines would be able to link with the Filipino American population in the United States. There are so many of us, like millions of Filipinos who are currently in the United States seeking a better future, but they also need to understand that they should be in solidarity also with the Filipinos here in the Philippines, no? Because their fellow Filipinos are being red tagged and are victims of human rights violations in our country. There are many progressive Filipino American groups in the Philippines, like in the United States, like the Malaya Movement, Anak Bayan, United States, League of Filipino Students in San Francisco State University. They are progressive groups that are linking with fellow Filipino Americans and are also tasked with educating Americans, no, and other oppressed peoples in the United States and other countries, no, in order to be in solidarity with the situations and the conditions being experienced by the Filipino people and the Filipino diaspora, uh, in the United States. No? Another thing would be supporting the human rights bill being being pushed in the American Congress, no? Because despite the human rights violations, despite the countless, no, killings and other forms of arrest, no, and the torture done by the current administration and the past administrations, the United States continuously funding the Philippine National Police and the Armed Forces of the Philippines. No? Last May, even amidst the pandemic, no, the U.S. Department of Defense even granted the sale of attack helicopters to the Duterte administration. No? So this is actually very linked, no, on how uh, the the current hold of United States in the Philippines uh, is beneficial, no. The terror law, no, is beneficial for maintaining the current hold of the United States in the Philippines because further militarization, further abuse of human rights in the Philippines would entail that the Philippines would be more open and would be more friendly to foreign businesses. So that would be great, no, if folks in the United States would help expose the funding, no, and how the U.S. government benefits and the U.S. corporations benefits from red tagging innocent civilians in the Philippines and exacerbating human rights violations and other forms of militarization in our country. Another thing is that for progressive Christians in the Philippines, in the United States, and beyond, it would be great if we see our struggles not as isolated struggles, but as struggles that should be dealt collectively, no, and are in solidarity with each other. We are facing with different kinds of fascist attacks. Here in the Philippines, we have terror law. In the United States, there is the campaign, no, to uphold the rights of Black people and other minorities. We received this news that 14 students from the student Christian movement in Myanmar are arrested, no, are currently detained because of the military coup d'etat in their country. So there should be higher forms of solidarity. There should be gaining in there's so inter uh, international solidarity among Christians should be strengthened, no, in order to make us realize that as Christians we should be standing up for the oppressed peoples of our country and the oppressed peoples of outside our country.
Thank you, Kaj. I just wanted to take a moment here. I know some of your colleagues have joined us. Maybe if you could introduce them. I believe Jonas is here and maybe we have some others.
So I would like to introduce my org mates, from Student Christian Movement of the Philippines. We have uh, Jonas from the Alliance Officer from uh, the National Office of Student Christian Movement of the Philippines. We have Tristan, our Deputy Spokesperson and National Org Officer from the National Office, and we have Naranja from our chapter in the north, from the province of Cagayan.
So welcome to all of you. If you want to jump in, if you have anything to add, we'd love to hear from the three of you.
Since I live in a more rural place than where Kedge is situated in, I would like to add up on the effects of anti-terror law and the communist insurgency here in the north. Yun. So I live in Cagayan. It's up north here in the Philippines, and it's agricultural. So that's the main source of livelihood of the community of people here. So back in 2020, while in a pandemic, our whole province actually was submerged in a flood. And although there was government assistance in the more urban areas in our region, farmers, ever since the pandemic till now, ever since they were victims of that mega flood, they have not received any type of assistance or financial support from the government. So there are farmers who are also organizers and who are also leaders in their own smaller communities who have been recently red tagged, and two actually have been arrested in the past month. And also senior citizens who are also farmers and organizers are being forced to surrender themselves and clean up their names because apparently they are supporters of the CPP, of the Communist Party of the Philippines. They are
Seems we lost her. Oh, no. Okay.
Oh my gosh. Am I being heard now?
Yes, we
Sorry, the internet is very slow here. Sorry. Ayun. Where was I? So the farmers and even just organizers are being forced to surrender themselves to the police, even though they are not supporters or they are not members of the CPP NPA. So if you visit our place here, you will see beside the roads, there are sacks of rice that have been painted with their names on it, calling them recruiters, calling them terrorists, even when they're just farmers who want to forward their demands to the government because they are truly in need right now. And the government has done nothing but to red tag them and to attack them. Moreover, in the educational institutions, I also am a senior high school student in a public school here in Cagayan. So our current setup of learning is through modules. So these modules are created by and produced by the government. So they have been using our modules to back up and to put forward state propaganda. To sometimes there were parts where there are cases or lessons that have been interjected with red tagging and all different types of propaganda that is just going to support the government even when the current situation really just doesn't require any more state backing for the government because they are uh, they are at fault right now. the Philippines is in danger and at risk of losing democracy, mainly because of the government. So that's all I can say for now. Thank you.
Hi, good day to all. Tristan here. I just wanna continue on painting a more provincial context on what's happening in the Philippines with the recent rise of the National Task Force to End Locust Arms Struggle, or NTFL-CAC as we infamously know them here. So here in Cavite, one of the largest coastal areas in the Philippines, not only are urban poor communities still suffers from left and right threats of demolitions, which the Department of Interior Local Governance has already um, released a memo saying that no demolition should continue while the pandemic is still going on. But still, urban poor mass organizers here are being attacked for siding and defending the rights to housing of urban poor communities here in Cavite. Not only that, but NTFL-CAC, or the National Task Force, has a record of sabotaging NSTP seminars. So NSTP seminars are like um, government programs for college students, like physical education, but for a mature level. So NSTP seminars turns to state propaganda, where the NTFL-CAC enjoys red tagging progressive organizations and progressive individuals, like SCMP and other mass organizations. And they still go on and continue this inside different schools, public high schools like where Naranja is, and state universities. So we really are suffering from a budgeted, mind you. NTFL-CAC has unallotted 19 billion fund to do all these things against the people. And recently here in southern Luzon, in southern Tagalog, last March 7, we horrendously witnessed the Bloody Sunday Massacre, wherein almost nine prominent mass organizers and activist leaders were killed, and one of these leaders was situated here in Cavite, and he was known as a very prominent organizer for the urban poor community, fisher folk community, and farmer communities here in the province. And just last 3 weeks after the Bloody Sunday Massacre, another attack was executed against another mass organizer in Laguna, which he had a record of already clamoring to the Commission of Human Rights that he was receiving death threats and all of these things, but still it happened. And as Kedge mentioned earlier, some of the petitioners against the anti-terror law, or the terror law as we call it here, already received death threats prior to being executed by state forces, but still their clamors fell on deaf ears, it would seem. For us students here in the Philippines, and specifically as a faith-based ecumenical organization and members, we are one with churches here being red tagged as well. So that's just to give you guys how wide and dangerously inclusive the terror law is, that it doesn't save anyone, no matter whether you're a church person, a church worker, a student, an activist, a civilian, a government official, even artists like celebrities here in the Philippines are being red tagged by the government. So the very recent church attack here in the Philippines was the freezing of the bank account of the United Church of Christ of the Philippines. The state froze their bank accounts, and they did this back in 2019 to the rural missionaries of the Philippines. And the state, of course, has a record of freezing bank accounts, and their excuse is always that these churches, these Christ-serving churches, support and funds communist armed rebels, when in fact they do not. This has always been the lazy explanation behind every red tagging against anyone here in the Philippines. So we really call on other ecumenical and international church formations and faith-based organizations to be one, and let's collectively place pressure, specifically in the U.S. Against the U.S. government for still funding and still supporting Duterte's war against the people. That's all I have to add. Thank you.
Hello, I am Jonas. I'm a middle school student, and I'm here to explain how faith-based group can help in the anti-terror law. Since excuse me, since the church hierarchy and other church leaders are being red tagged, they can call out on their homilies and worship service like Bishop Pabilio is doing last Triduum. Bishop called out the Duterte administration for their incompetence. The United uh, the United Church of Christ in the Philippines and the Association of Major Religious Superiors in the Philippines also filed against the anti-terror law in the Supreme Court. We can see the church impact against the Duterte and Marcos dictatorship when Cardinal Sin called out the people. We can also see it in Bishop Abilio. And just wanna add, the new Archbishop of Manila was also a human rights advocate, so it's a good blending with Bishop Abilio. We are hoping to see a new Cardinal Sin that will oust the current administration. That's all.
Thank you to all of you who shared. I think we're coming up on time, so maybe one last question. Could you offer some concrete actions or methods that allies can take to help you in your work in this junk terror law movement? What actions do you feel are most effective that you have seen, especially in this pandemic?
So, so here in the Philippines, of course, because of the pandemic, we had to resort to almost exclusive actions that are done online. Uh, we are trying to be tagged as the social media capital of the world because so many Filipinos are using Facebook, Twitter, etc., and we're always trending. So we're trying to mobilize people in the internet in order to always trend the petition against the terror law, the the um the campaigns for upholding human rights in our country. In fact, even during the pandemic, when the terror law is being deliberated in the House of Representatives, the social media clamor was so loud that we were able to uh, encourage other Congress people to back out from um, from promoting the terror law. We even managed to encourage the the one who is mainly pushing the terror law to back out from the bill, no? No? But of course, we realized that there's extreme limitations regarding online action. That's why Filipino people are being persistent or being trying to encourage no, on-ground mobilization. Of course, following health protocols. No, that even during the lockdown, this must not be used as an opportunity by Duterte, because we are seeing that the lockdown is his fever dream to impose dictatorship even without legal basis or even without legal proclamation. So the perseverance of the Filipino people to express their sentiments on off online and off ground is very important for us. Another thing is that we are trying to uh, we're trying to forge the broadest possible alliance between all political colors, in order to whether you are in the center or whether you're in the left here in the Philippines, as long as you are against terror law, as long as we are trying to put Duterte as the narrowest target, who is the most responsible for the human rights violations in our country. That's the common denominator that should be practiced across political lines in our country. And it's very important to us because that's the thing that's affecting the people here in the Philippines. And it's very important for us to seek alliances even with celebrities and other personalities. Because, for example, during a during an online forum regarding women's rights, the government even red tagged Miss Universe 2018 Catriona Gray for upholding women's rights in the Philippines. And because of that, the mass movement, the mass organizations of women launched different kinds of protests in order to defend Filipino women, and that backtracked against the military who are trying to red tag Filipino beauty queens and personalities who are against terror law, who are against government government inutility under the pandemic, and against government red tagging, and against the upholding of even patriarchal culture in our country. Because to add, Duterte is very patriarchal in nature. He's very he is a he admittedly said that he sexually harassed women in the past. So the kind of patriarchal, the kind of fascistic tendency of our rulers binds us in order to forge great unities, in order to forge broad unities among different kinds of people, different political lines here in our country.
Thank you so much, Kej, Naranja, Tristan, Jonas. I really appreciate all that you've shared this evening. Maybe before we officially close, if there are any final questions that people didn't have time to type into the chat box, but just want to say out loud, we can offer space for that before we close out for tonight. I don't know if Arun or Julia or John or anyone, not to put anyone on the spot, but just want to make sure everyone feels like they have a space to share if they have anything they want to ask.
Can I go, if that's okay?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. I could actually see the same similarities happening in Pakistan. They have the similar kind of laws. It's like I could see that it's the same textbook example is happening in Pakistan. They actually but it's against specifically not against larger community, but against minority communities. So like what you said in Mindanao, the province where it's more based majority Muslim majority, they actually use this law against Muslim majority to suppress them. It's actually a similar kind of a thing happening in Pakistan, where they have certain blasphemy laws, and these blasphemy laws are attacked and to Christians. So I think I don't have any question. I just see that it's the same kind of a thing that is happening also in Pakistan. We could see that same thing happening in Hong Kong now. The similar kind of laws have been used against so I think it's the pattern that is happening everywhere. I just want to say this, I don't have any question particularly.
Erin?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm a United Methodist clergy, and I serve the California Nevada Conference with George Dominguez. And on the call is Hanyal Garibay, in which he and I have been introduced to the student Christian movement in the Philippines and at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. I just wanted to assure Tristan, Jonas, Naranja, and how do you pronounce your name? Kay, Andrés?
Ish.
Yeah, that we are your kasamas, that we are your allies. The United Methodist Church in the Philippines has also been branded as an enemy of the state by the Philippine government, and graduates of Union Theological Seminary, in which one of the victims of the Bloody Sunday on March 7 is a clergy serving in the South, in the Visayas, working for the farmers in the Iloilo region, if I'm not mistaken. The United Methodist Church here in the US has created a task force under the Filipino-American Caucus in order to support Investigate Philippines. And we are working with the General Council on Church and Society in addressing and putting pressure to the Philippine government to stop extrajudicial killings. And our own annual conference has a task force that every year we're sending a delegation to the Philippines for fact-finding mission, and also the California Pacific Annual Conference is doing that. And one of the risks that the anti-terror bill put into us is that even Filipino Americans in diaspora working in addressing these issues are also being red tagged. But we are with you in this prophetic role that we have.
Erin?
Yes, Hanyal.
Okay, Hanyal here. Hanyal Garibay. Incidentally, I come from Davao City, the same. Duterte is my townmate, unfortunately. Anyway, and not only that, I used to be an SCMer myself. I'm what they would call a senior friend. And back in the 80s. Anyway, and during the Marcos dictatorship period. Now, there's one thing that we were able to do in regard to curbing military abuses, of human rights, human rights violations during the time of the administration of Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo and Benigno Aquino III. We were able to get to lobby Congress to condition military aid to the Philippines on the respect of human rights, if there's an improvement in the human rights situation. And the result is that, the Congress was able to pass a resolution, and almost immediately the killings stopped. The killings of activists, journalists, and all of those. And I think that's one thing that we can do here in the US. I'm based in San Francisco, by the way. And aside from that, I think maybe just one question to these young people from the SCM. Aside from us, from what we're doing to lobby our own politicians here in the US, what else do you think we can do here? As maybe not just diasporic Filipinos like me, like Phil, but also the American public in general. What can we do?
To also link with the manifestation of Sir Fel, there's an effort currently with the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, encouraging the National Council of Churches in Canada to pressure the Canadian government in order to encourage the Canadian government to pressure the regime here in the Philippines. So from very small efforts to linking with major religious groups in the United States, that would be great in order to pressure the Philippine government to stop the killings. Because even the United Nations have condemned the way the Duterte administration is handling the pandemic by using the lockdown, using the pandemic in order to stifle the human rights violations in the Philippines. And it would be great if uh, uh, people in the United States and other parts of the world can also can follow the accounts, social media accounts of progressive groups here in the Philippines who are trying to echo the legitimate demands of the people against poverty, against fascism in our country. Because the issues of economic poverty and fascism, especially here in the Philippines, are not isolated from each other. When people clamor for economic demands, the government does not give them aid. The government does not give them sustainable livelihood. Instead, the government is clamping down against our voices. And if we try to resist the clampdowns in our country, the government clamps down harder against the Filipino people. So the broadest support, the widest support that the Filipino people uh, can can get from within the country and outside the country, that would be very helpful, even through small steps.
On the creative side, there actually an initiative, initiative, the national immediate province or the NC Philippines was put on stricter enhanced community quarantine. Really invite churches here in Cavite to make use of their church plaza, and church grounds for chalk art.
Seems like we might have lost Tristan there. Kaj, do you want to, he was talking about truck art, I think. Do you want to add a little bit to that? Or someone else?
Yeah, I can expound on their efforts in the province. So because of the Bloody Sunday massacre in their province, in their region, they're trying to get the widest support. Oh, there's Tristan. I think he's back.
Oh, sorry. Wi-Fi was anyway, as I was saying, there was actually an effort to make use of church plazas and church grounds for a chalk art installation, echoing the calls of today, like specifically the junking of the terror law. Maybe our international friends and allies can make use in a similar manner of their church grounds in creating this signage. I think that would be one concrete example of how we can make louder and amplify our call by visually sending these messages in our church grounds using chalk art or whatever manner you may think of, and that would spread, I think, like wildfire in terms of solidarity message here in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thanks, Tristan. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time tonight, but I know that Kaj has also asked me, there's a very tangible way that if you would like to show your support and solidarity this evening, so I'll give a few announcements in a minute, but then afterwards, if you want to stick around on the call, Kaj will give us some instructions for how we can do that from our very own Zoom meeting. It'll involve, I think, writing something on a sheet of paper and holding it up in your video screen, so maybe go ahead and look for that as I'm offering some final announcements if you want to stick around around and participate in that. So again, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for sharing all of the work that you're doing and really giving us a model for what it looks like to show up and advocate for those in our own communities who are being oppressed by the horrible systems of injustices. And we just really appreciate your time and your wisdom and for sharing all of that you're working on with us. We look forward to a continued partnership with you all as well. So just a few announcements for everyone tonight who's here on this call. We're going to have another global prayer gathering on Monday. That is Monday, April 26th at 10 p.m. Eastern time. And we hope that everyone will join us for that. It's a 20-minute prayer gathering followed by some time of informal fellowship and conversation. And then our next Progressive Christianity 101 conversation is going to be on Monday, May 3rd at 10 p.m. Eastern time with Reverend Erica Williams, and that will be on the Bible and poverty. And we'll have a video for that as well and more information to come, but be on the lookout May 3rd at 10 p.m. Eastern time. And for ongoing updates, you can check out our website to see announcements about other events that we have going on. You can sign up for updates that you'll get via email. You can also follow us on our very new Instagram at WSCF.USA, and we'll be posting announcements there, and our Facebook group as well, Friends of the WSCF. So those are all the ways that you can stay connected. And also just want to thank Thomas and Aurora as well for you all and your co-moderation tonight. We really appreciate your leadership of this conversation. So thank you all. And I'm going to pass it back over to Kej, who's going to give us instructions if you want to stay on and show your solidarity.
Yeah, since we are here with multiple kinds of people, we are actually encouraging to show solidarity by posting through our screens, either through a piece of paper or through our gadgets, the hashtags Jump Terror Law, Uphold Human Rights, and Stop the Killings. So I'm gonna put the hashtags in the chat. And so this is a sample of what we may do. So here's from my tablet, just the three hashtags: Jump Terror Law, Uphold Human Rights, and Stop the Killings. In order to show our united solidarity as Filipinos, as oppressed peoples from other nations, to stand with the Filipinos here in our country and stand with upholding human rights in the Philippines and in other countries around the world. So this is actually one of our practices here in the Philippines that garner attention from the media, from other allied groups, by posting social media rallies after prayer gatherings, after conferences, trying to make use of the social media, trying to maximize our social media presence in order to post unified stances to uphold the human rights in our country. So you may write the hashtags on a piece of paper or in your gadgets. So let's just wait for the others for their time. And I think we are set, so I can take the. Oh, I think there's some people. I'm gonna screenshot now, so I'm counting from 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much for showing solidarity with the oppressed peoples of the Philippines. So you can actually replicate these kinds of practices after your prayer gatherings, no, after your conferences, no, in order to show action even though people are like not physically gathering.
Thank you so much, Kaj. Thank you for offering that opportunity for us to be in support of the work that you're doing. And again, thank you to all of you that are joining us from SCM Philippines and those of you that are joining us from other parts of the world. We are grateful for you to be here tonight and we look forward to the next conversation. So have a wonderful night, everyone.
Thank you.
Erin, thanks for organizing.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you very
Bye,
much.
everyone. Take care.
I posted the Twitter and Facebook accounts.
Thanks,
that I
Kaj.
can follow. Thank
Great.
you very much.